Ugh, my life. Guys, welcome back to Sleepless Tales. We're still reading Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. This book's pretty good. I'm sure you already know that because you've watched the other two. You haven't watched the other two? What are you doing? Anyways, we're starting on part two. Um, every time that, okay, this is weird. Every time he says, by Jove in this, I've heard that phrase before, but I always thought that they said by job, and that it was like a reference to the Bible, like, oh, by job, because that's a chapter or a book rather in the Bible, job. I think it's in the New Testament. I don't remember. Um, ooh, should I do a reading of? No, never mind. I'm not going to do a reading of the Bible. I'm sure there's been a billion of those already. If I did, I would only read through like maybe Exodus or the first one that starts with an E also. It, uh, E, right? E. Anyways, let's get started back with Heart of Darkness. Part 2 will probably get done in hopefully 3 sections. And then we'll be finishing up in probably 3 more. So let's get started. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe. Like and favorite too if you want to throw in a fun little dandy little thing for me. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'm gonna start a Patreon soon. It's gonna have a $1 maximum donation limit, and if you pay one whole dollar, I will in fact do nothing. And by I'm gonna make a Patreon, that's a complete lie. I'm not gonna do that. Not yet. Maybe someday. Okay. Anyways, let's get into Heart of Darkness, starting on part 2, and for me, page 50. One evening, as I was lying flat on the deck of my steamboat, I heard voices approaching. And there were the nephew and the uncle strolling along the bank. I laid my head on my arm again, and had nearly lost myself in a doze when somebody said in my ear, as it were, I am as harmless as a little child, but I don't like to be dictated to. Am I the manager, or am I not? I was ordered to send him there. It's incredible. I became aware that the two were standing on the shore, alongside the forepart of the steamboat, just below my head. I did not move. It did not occur to me to move. I was sleepy. It is unpleasant, grunted the uncle. He has asked the administration to be sent there, said the other, with the idea of showing what he could do. Well, I was instructed accordingly. Look at the influence that man must have. Is it not frightful? They both agreed it was frightful. Then made several bizarre remarks. Make rain in fine weather. One man, the council, by the nose. Bits of absurd sentences that got the better of my drowsiness, so that I had pretty near the whole story of my wits about me when the uncle said, The climate may do away with this difficulty for you. Is he alone here? Yes, answered the manager. He sent his assistant down the river with a note to me in these terms. Clear this poor devil out of the country, and don't bother sending more of that sort. I'd rather be alone than have any kind of men you can dispose of with me. It was more than a year ago. Can you imagine such impotence? Anything since then? Asked the other hoarsely. Ivory, jerked the nephew. Lots of it. Prime sort. Lots. Most annoying from him. And with that, questioned the heavy rumble. Invoice, was the reply fired out, so to speak. Then silence. They'd been talking about Kurtz. I was broad awake by this time, but, lying perfectly at ease, remained still, having no inducement to change my position. How did that ivory come all this way? Growled the elder man, who seemed very vexed. The other explained that it had come with a fleet of canoes in charge of an English half-caste clerk Kurtz had with him. That Kurtz had apparently intended to return himself, the station being by that time bare of goods and stores, but, after coming 300 miles, had suddenly decided to go back, which he started to do alone in a small dugout with 4 paddlers, leaving the half-caste to continue down the river with the ivory. The 2 fellows there seemed astounded at anybody attempting such a thing. They were at loss for an adequate motive. As to me, I seemed to see Kurtz for the first time. It was a distinct glimpse. The dugout, and 4 paddling savages, and the lone white man turning his back suddenly on the headquarters. Yawn relief, on thoughts of home, perhaps, and setting his face towards the depths of the wilderness, towards his empty and desolate station. I did not know the motive. Perhaps he was just simply a fine fellow who stuck to his work for its own sake. His name, you understand, had not been pronounced once. He was that man. The half-caste, who, as far as I could see, had conducted a difficult trip with great prudence and pluck, was invariably alluded to as that scoundrel. The scoundrel had reported that the man had been very ill, had recovered imperfectly. The two below me moved away then a few paces, and strolled back and forth at some little distance. I heard, military post, doctor, 200 miles, quite alone now, unavoidable delays, 9 months, no news, strange rumors. They approached again, just as the manager was saying, no one, as far as I know, unless a species of wandering trader, a pestilential fellow, snapping ivory from the natives. Who was it they were talking about now? I gathered in snatches that this was some man supposed to be in Kurt's district, and of whom the manager did not approve. We will not be free from unfair competition till one of these fellows is hanged for an example, he said. Certainly, grunted the other. Get him hanged. Why not? Anything can be done in this country. That's what I say. Nobody here, you understand, here can endanger your position. And why? You stand the climate. You outlast them all. The danger is in Europe. But there, before I left, I took care to... They moved off and whispered. Then their voices rose again. The extraordinary series of delays is not my fault. I did my best. The fat man sighed. Very sad. And the pestiferous absurdity of his talk, continued the other. He bothered me enough when he was here. Each station should be like a beacon on the road towards better things. A center for trade, of course, but also for humanizing, improving, instructing. Conceive you, that ass. He wants to be a manager. No, it's... Here he got choked of by excessive indignation, and I lifted my head the least bit. I was surprised to see how near they were, right under me. I could have spat on their hats. They were looking on the ground, absorbed in thought. The manager was switching his leg with a slender twig. His sagacious relative lifted his head. You have been well since you came out this time, he asked. The other gave a start. Who? I? Oh, like a charm. But the rest, oh my goodness. All sick. They die so quick, too. That I haven't had the time to send them out of the country. It's incredible. Just so, grunted the uncle. Ah, my boy, trust to this. I say trust to this. I saw him extend his short flipper of an arm for a gesture that took in the forest, the creek, the mud, the river. It seemed to beckon with a dishonoring flourish before the sunlit face of the land, a treacherous appeal to the lurking death, to the hidden evil, to the profound darkness of its heart. It was so startling that I leaped to my feet and looked back at the edge of the forest, as though I had expected an answer of some sort to that black display of confidence. You know the foolish notions that come to one sometimes. The high stillness confronted these two figures with its omniscious patience, waiting for the passing away of a fantastic invasion. They swore aloud together, out of sheer fright, I believe. Then, pretending not to know anything of my existence, turned back to the station. The sun was low, and leaning forward side by side, they seemed to be tugging painfully uphill with their two ridiculous shadows of unequal length. They trailed behind them slowly, the tall grass, without bending a single blade. In a few days, the Dorado expedition went into the patient wilderness that closed upon it as the sea closes over a diver. Long afterwards, the news came that all the donkeys were dead. I know nothing as to the fate of the less valuable animals. They, no doubt, like the rest of us, found what they deserved. I did not inquire. I was then rather excited to the prospect of meeting Kurtz very soon. When I say very soon, I mean it comparatively. It was just 2 months from the day we left the creek when we came to the bank below Kurt's station. Going up that river was like traveling back to the earliest beginnings of the world, when vegetation rioted on the earth and the big trees were kings. An empty stream, great silence, an impenetrable forest. The air was warm and thick, heavy and sluggish. There was no joy in the brilliance of sunshine. The long stretches of the waterway ran on, deserted into the gloom of overshadowed distances. On silvery sandbanks, hippos and alligators sunned themselves side by side. The broadening waters flowed through a mob of wooded islands. You lost your way on that river, as you would in a desert, and butted all day long against shoals, trying to find the channel, till you thought yourself bewitched and cut off forever from everything you had known once, somewhere, far away, in another existence perhaps. There are moments when one's past came back to one, as it will sometimes when you have not a moment to spare for yourself. But it came in the shape of an unrestful and noisy dream, remembered with wonder amongst the overwhelming realities of this strange world of plants and water and silence. And this stillness of life did not in the least resemble a peace. It was the stillness of an implacable force brooding over an inscrutable intention. I looked at you with a vengeful aspect. I got used to it afterwards. I did not see it anymore. I had no time. I had to keep guessing at the channel. I had to discern, mostly by inspiration, the signs of hidden banks. I watched for sunken stones. I was learning to clap my teeth smartly before my heart flew out. When I shaved by a fluke, some infernal sly old snag that would have ripped the life out of the tin pot steamboat and drowned all the pilgrims. I had to keep a lookout for the signs of dead wood we'd cut up in the morning for next day's steaming. When you have to attend to things of that sort, to the mere incidents of the surface, the reality, I tell you, fades. The inner truth is hidden, luckily, but I felt it all the same. I felt often its mysterious stillness watching me and my monkey tricks, just as it watches you fellows performing on your respective tightropes for, what is it, half a crown a tumble? Try to be civil, Marlowe, grumbled a voice, and I knew there was at least one listener awake besides myself. Yeah, I beg your pardon. I forget the heartache which makes up the rest of the price. And indeed, what does the price matter, if the trick be well done? You do your tricks very well. I didn't do badly either, since I managed not to sink that steamboat on my first trip. It's a wonder to me, yet. Imagine a blindfolded man set to drive a van over a bad road. I sweated and shivered over that business considerably, I can tell you. After all, for a seaman, to scrape the bottom of the thing that's supposed to float all the time under his care is an unpardonable sin. No one may know of it, but you never forget the thump, eh? A blow on the very heart. You remember it. You dream of it. You wake up at night, think of it. Years earlier, go hot and cold all over. I don't pretend to say that steamboat floated all the time. More than once, you had to wade for a bit, with 20 cannibals splashing around and pushing. We had enlisted some of these chaps on the way for a crew. Fine fellows. Cannibals, in their place. They were men one could work with, and I'm grateful to them. And, after all, they did not eat each other before my face. They had brought along a provision of hippo meat, which went rotten, and made the mystery of the wilderness stink in my nostrils. Phew. I can sniff it now. I had the manager on board, and 3 or 4 pilgrims with their staves, all complete. Sometimes we came upon a station close by the bank, clinging to the skirts of the unknown, and the white men rushing out a tumble-down hovel. With great gestures of joy and surprise and welcome, it seemed very strange, had the appearance of being held there captive by a spell. The word ivory would ring in the air for a while, and on we went again into the silence, along empty reaches, round the still bends, between the high walls of our winding way, reverberating in hollow claps the ponderous beat of the stern wheel. Trees and trees and millions of trees, massive, immense, and running up high, and at their foot, hugging the bank against the stream, crept the little begrimed steamboat, like a sluggish beetle, crawling on the floor of a lofty portico. It made you feel very small, very lost. And yet it was not altogether depressing, that feeling. After all, if you were small, the grimy beetle crawled on, which was just what you wanted it to do. Where the pilgrims imagined it crawling to, I don't know. Some place where they expected to get something, I bet. For me, it crawled towards Kurt's, exclusively. But when the steam pipe started leaking, we crawled very slow. The reaches opened before us and closed behind, as if the force had stepped leisurely across the water to bar the way for our return. We penetrated deeper and deeper into the heart of darkness. It was very quiet there. At night, sometimes the roll of drums behind the curtain of trees would run up the river and remain sustained faintly, as if hovering in the high air above our heads, until the first break of day. Whether it meant war, peace, or prayer, we could not tell. The dawns were heralded by a descent of a chill stillness. The woodcutters slept. Their fires burned low. The snapping of a twig would make you start. We were wanderers on a prehistoric Earth, on an Earth that wore the aspect of an unknown planet. We could have fancied ourselves the first of men taking possession of an accursed inheritance, to be subdued at the cost of profound anguish and of excessive toil. But suddenly, as we struggled round a bend, there'd be a glimpse of rush walls, of peaked grass roofs, a burst of yells, a whirl of black limbs, a mass of hands clapping, feet stamping, of bodies swaying, of eyes rolling, under the droop of heavy and motionless foliage. The steamer toiled along slowly on the edge of black and incomprehensible frenzy. The prehistoric man was cursing us, praying us, welcoming us. Who could tell? We were cut off from the comprehension of our surroundings. We glided past like phantoms, wondering and secretly appalled, as sane men would be before an enthusiastic outbreak into a madhouse. We could not understand because we were too far, and could not remember because we were traveling in the night of the first ages, of those ages that are gone, leaving hardly a sign, no memories. The earth seemed unearthly. We are accustomed to look upon the shackled form of a conquered monster, but there you could look at the thing monstrous and free. It was unearthly. And the men were... No, they were not inhuman. Well, that was the worst of it. The suspicion of their not being inhuman. It would slowly come to one. They howled and leaped and spun and made horrid faces, but what thrilled you was just the thought of their humanity, like yours. The thought of your remote kinship with this wild and passionate uproar. Ugly. Yes, it was ugly enough, but if you were man enough, you would admit to yourself that there was in you the faintest trace of a response to the terrible frankness of that noise, the dim suspicion of there being a meaning in it, which you, so remote from the night of first ages, could comprehend. And why not? The mind of man is capable of anything, because everything is in it. All the past, as well as the future. What was there after all? Joy, fear, sorrow, devotion, valor, rage? Who can tell? But truth stripped of its cloak of time. Let the fool gape and shudder, the man knows, and can look on without a wink. But he must at least be as much of a man as these on the shore. He must meet that truth with his own true stuff, with his own inborn strength. Principles won't do. Acquisitions, clothes, pretty rags that would fly off at the first good shake. No, you want a deliberate belief, an appeal to me in this fiendish row, is there? Very well, I admit. But I have a voice too. For good or evil, mine is a speech that cannot be silenced, of course. A fool, with sheer fright and fine sentiments, is always safe. Who's that grunting? You wonder I didn't go ashore for a howl and a dance? Well, no, I didn't. Fine sentiments, you said? Fine sentiments, be hanged. I had no time. I had to mess about with the white lead and strips of woolen blankets, helping to put bandages on those leaky steam pipes. I tell you, I had to watch the steering and circumvent those snags and get the tin pot along by hook or by crook. There was surface truth enough in these things to save a wiser man. And between whiles, I had to look after the savage who was fireman. He was an improved specimen. He could fire up a vertical boiler. He was there below me. Upon my word, to look at him was as edifying as seeing a dog in the parody of breeches and a feather hat, walking on his hind legs. A few months of training had done for that really fine chap. He squinted at the steam gauge and the water gauge with an evident effort for intrepidity, and he had filed teeth, too, poor devil, and the wool of his pate shaved into queer patterns, and 3 ornamental scars on each of his cheeks. He ought to have been clapping his hands and stamping his feet on the bank, instead of which he was hard at work, a thrall to strange witchcraft, full of improving knowledge. He was useful, because he had been instructed, and what he knew was this, that, should the water in the transparent thing disappear, the evil spirit inside the boiler would get angry through the greatness of his thirst and take a terrible vengeance. And so he sweated and fired up and watched the glass fearfully, with an impromptu charm, made of rags, tied to his arm, and a piece of polished bone, as big as a watch, stuck flatways through his lower lip, while the wooded bank slipped past us slowly. The short noise was left behind, the interminable miles of silence, and we crept on, towards Kurt's. But the snags were thick, and water was treacherous and shallow. The boiler seemed indeed to have a sulky devil in it, and thus neither that fireman nor I had any time to peer into our creepy thoughts. Some 50 miles below the interstation, we came upon a hut of reeds, an inclined and melancholy pole, with the unrecognizable tatters of what had been a flag of some sort flying from it, in a neatly stacked woodpile. This was unexpected. We came to the bank, and on the stack of firewood found a flat piece of board with some faded pencil writing on it. We deciphered it, and it said, "A wood for you. Hurry up. Approach cautiously." There was a signature, but it was illegible. Not Kurt's, a much longer word. Hurry up. Where? Up the river? Approach cautiously? We had not done so. But the warning could not have been meant for the place, where it could be only found after approach. Something was wrong above, but what, and how much? That was the question. We commented adversely on the imbecility of that telegraphic style. The bush around said nothing, and would not let us look very far, either. A torn curtain of red twill hung in the doorway of the hut, and flapped sadly in our faces. The dwelling was dismantled, but we could see a white man who lived there not very long ago. There remained a rude table, a plank on 2 posts. A heap of rubbish reposed in a dark corner, and by the door I picked up a book. It had lost its covers, and the pages had been thumbed into a state of extremely dirty softness. But the back had been lovingly stitched afresh with white cotton thread, and looked clean yet. It was an extraordinary find. Its title was An Inquiry into Some Points of Seamanship, by a man Towson, some such name, master in His Majesty's Navy. The matter looked dreary reading, though, with illustrative diagrams and repulsive tables of figures, and the copy was 60 years old. I handled this amazing antiquity with the greatest possible tenderness, lest it should dissolve in my hands. Within, Towson, or Tower, was inquiring earnestly into the breaking strains of ships' chains and tackles, and other such matters. Not a very enthralling book, but at first glance you could see there was a stillness of intention, an honest concern for the right way of going to work, which made these humble pages, thought out so many years ago, luminous with another man's professional light. The simple old sailor, with his talk of chains and purchases, made me forget the jungle and the pilgrims in a delicious sensation of having come upon something unmistakably real. Such a book being here was wonderful enough, but still more astounding were the notes penciled in the margin, and plainly referring to the text. I couldn't believe my eyes. They were in cipher. Yes, it looked like cipher. Fancy a man lying with him a book of that description, into this nowhere and studying it, and making notes, in cipher at that. It was an extravagant mystery. I had been dimly aware for some time of a worrying noise, and when I lifted my eyes, I saw the woodpile was gone, and the manager, aided by all the pilgrims, was shouting at me from the riverside. And I slipped the book into my pocket. And I assure you, to leave off reading was like tearing myself away from the shelter of an old and solid friendship. I started the lame engine ahead. It must be this miserable traitor, this intruder, exclaimed the manager, looking back malevolently at the place we had left. He must be English, I said. It will not save him from getting into trouble if he's not careful, muttered the manager darkly. I observed his assumed innocence that no man was safe from trouble in this world. The current was more rapid now. The steamer seemed at her last gasp. The stern wheel flopped languidly, and I caught myself listening on tiptoe for the next beat of the boat. And in somber truth, I expected the wretched thing to give up every moment. It was like watching the last flickers of a life. But still, we crawled. Sometimes I would pick out a tree a little way ahead and measure our progress towards Kurt's Bay. But I lost it invariably before we got abreast. To keep the eyes so long on one thing was too much for human patience. The manager displayed a beautiful resignation, and I fretted and fumed and took to arguing with myself whether or not I would talk openly with Kurtz. But before I could come to any conclusion, it occurred to me that my speech, or my silence, indeed any action of mine, would be a mere futility. What did it matter what anyone knew or ignore? What did it matter who was manager? One gets sometimes such a flash of insight. The essentials of this affair lay deep under the surface, beyond my reach and beyond my power of meddling. Zooey mama, fellows. That's where I'm gonna cut it again this time. On page 63. I hope you enjoyed this part of the reading. I'll catch you in the next part. This is a fun book. I wish... Gosh, guys. Sorry, I keep picking the dicey ones, but oops. Okay, see you in the next part. This is Sleepless Tales as always. You have a great night. Goodbye.